Hello fellow collectors, I hope you are doing very well indeed. Today I continue with my ongoing series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month, and today we're looking at my February in film. As I mentioned in the intro to last month's video, I'm working this year to try to change my relationship with both film watching and film collecting, and as of recording this video, I've actually just finished a 100-day break from buying any new films, and I think it's been a really valuable experience for me. It's been particularly encouraging to see my watch list reduce so steadily for such a prolonged period of time. Also last month I tried something new. As collectors we know all too well that sometimes just choosing a film to watch can take a long time, and so in order to try to tackle that a bit for myself, pretty much at random I took about 30 films from my collection, though I did try to kind of even it out between the different boutique labels. I took those out, put them on a little shelf of their own, and I wanted to have that as my pool of films to watch for February, and I think it worked pretty well. I was able to make decisions much quicker and also it made the month a very varied month film-wise. And so, without any further ado, let's talk about the best films I watched in February. First up, and we have The Blue Angel, a film from 1930 and directed by the brilliant Joseph von Sternberg, and to no one's surprise, this one stars Marlene Dietrich, as well as Emil Jannings, Kurt Geron and Rosa Valetti. I've wanted to check this one out for quite a long time as it's on the 1001 movies list, so it's been on my radar for a while, and I'm delighted to say that this one was well worth the wait as it certainly didn't disappoint. Our story follows Emil Jannings, who plays a prim and proper professor from a local school, a very respectable gentleman in every way, and one whose life is organised and lived through routine. Some of his students start acting very naughtily, and in an effort to try to stomp it out and put them back on the right track, he ends up following them down to a sort of travelling burlesque show, or cabaret. And it's here that his life changes as he meets Marlene Dietrich's character, Lola Lola. What we have in this one is a sort of Pretty Woman style of story where the professor's fortunes become entangled with hers, as he finds himself drawn to her after she shows him some affection and sweetness. It's really a story about what we would do for love, or at least what we might think is love, but maybe perhaps is just infatuation. It reminded me in some ways of The Devil is a Woman, which was made 5 years later, again by Joseph von Sternberg and again starring Marlene Dietrich, and I think the films would make great companion pieces. Dietrich certainly excelled at playing roles where men make an absolute shambles of themselves by falling for her. But as is so expertly shown in The Blue Angel, what else could he do? Through some great but small moments we see his built-in routines start to break down. We sense the professor's descent, but we don't despise him for it. She is unlike anything he's encountered before, and so how can he be prepared for the unexpected? And how can we ever truly master our own emotions, particularly when they overcome us? So throw in some chaos, some alcohol, and then sometimes things just feel inevitable, and his inexorable movement towards her is shown so well here, just perfectly directed by von Sternberg. Emil Jannings delivers just a great performance as Herr Professor, as he carries with him this air of dignity and somewhat plump grace, giving off this aura of upper-classness and high society, in great contrast of course to the turn that his life later takes. Dietrich is absolutely brilliant as usual, channeling this seductive, almost siren-like nature, but also unrepentant with a youthful arrogance. I don't want to spoil any reveals or any more of the story than I already have, but there is some absolutely superb, powerful and poignant imagery used here that made a real impact on me. From the use of makeup to seemingly friendly terms of endearment, moments are crafted that are quite brutal but just brilliant to watch. Overall, this was a real journey of a film that certainly lived up to my expectations. Tragic in some ways, cautionary in others. I thought the ending was also exceptional, and it's one that's well worth your time. It was also wonderful to finally hear Marlene Dietrich speaking German in a film. This one was actually filmed simultaneously in German and English, so you have the two options, but as far as I'm aware, the German language version is the superior one. Joseph von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich of course collaborated on many other films too, and exploring them is a great film journey to take if you haven't seen their other ones. Sadly, it's out of print now, but Indicator released a wonderful box set with their films, which are still available in standard editions, and Criterion have also released a box set of theirs in the States too. Well worth seeking out if you haven't done so already. Up next, and we have Miller's Crossing, a film from 1990 and by the Coen brothers, but specifically directed by Joel Coen. It stars Gabriel Byrne, Marcia Gay Harden, Albert Finney, John Polito, John Turturro and J.E. Freeman, and also a small role for Steve Buscemi. This is, at first glance, a 1920s set crime and gangster story, but I'd say more accurately that this is actually like a fantastic mixture of a crime story and something almost like a political thriller, where Machiavellian schemes are devised and where characters are played off against each other, and where our main character, played superbly by Gabriel Byrne, tries to keep all the plates spinning as best as he can, while things kick off around him. He is doing his utmost to achieve the outcome he wants, but my goodness, it does not always go smoothly, and when he plays with fire, it costs him dearly on several occasions. In fact, I loved how many times, and it almost became a hilarious trope, where he would step out of a doorway and then immediately get punched in the face because he's crossing everyone and not making friends anywhere. Byrne plays the sort of top captain, if you will, of the top crime boss in the city, whose desire to assert his dominance and power leads to a falling out with one of his subordinates. A subordinate that has grander plans than to stay in his role, but actually wants to take over the city for himself. And we have Byrne's character, Tom Reagan, caught somewhere in the middle as his boss goes against his advice, which also leads to a falling out between them as well. For me, despite a plethora of amazing scenes in this film, the very best ones were by far between Gabriel Byrne and Marcia Gay Harden, as they were just electric to watch. We have both actors on absolutely top form. They have this complicated but magnetic chemistry. It's like they can't stand each other, but they also can't stay away from each other. There is such a burning disdain, and yet such passion, and it comes through in their every interaction, and it was simply riveting to watch. I thought it was also incredibly interesting just how many times Gabriel Byrne's character gets beaten up, but so rarely does he retaliate, almost like he had it coming, and so just shrugs it off. And that added an extremely interesting element for me because, of course, he is supposed to be a top criminal boss's number 2 guy, so he can clearly inflict violence when he needs to, but he still manages to maintain this air of authority about him, like he's the one that's got the power, like he's in control, despite almost never using violence to achieve his ends. I thought this was really just such clever filmmaking to have that work so well. Overall, this is a hard film in many ways, about hard men. It's quite a sombre tale, certainly not a barrel of laughs, and Gabriel Byrne never once cracks a smile throughout the entire thing. Being a Coen brothers film though, the dialogue is just amazing, rich and witty and thought-provoking. It's filled with some incredibly tense moments that will have droplets of sweat beading on your forehead, and just kept me utterly engaged. Really, really brilliant, this one. Moving on, we have Goodbye and Amen, a film from 1970 and directed by Damiano Damiani, who, if you also collect Radiance titles, you'll be fairly familiar with by now. And this one stars Tony Musante, John Steiner, Claudia Cardinale, Anna Zinnerman and John Forsyth. I thoroughly enjoyed this one, the story having varied threads which really kept me engaged, and I thought it was expertly paced too, ramping up and then slowing down as needed, and I'm glad to say that I was kept guessing throughout. The core of our story here is about a lone gunman, but we also have some extra spice added, which is an espionage aspect as well as a romance aspect, which were both just excellent additions here that altogether crafted something pretty fantastic. And so even though you partly have a procedural and the regular elements you'd expect with that, there is more than enough new and interesting parts thrown in here to really elevate this. Though I recognise Tony Musante and even have a couple other films with him sat in my collection, this was actually the first film I've ever seen with him, and it was a great introduction as I thought he was really good here, as his character, a CIA agent, is trying to keep control of a spiralling situation connected with another situation connected with yet another situation. No easy feat. A standout for me though, I think, was Claudia Cardinale, who as usual was just superb, as she shows both a strength and a caring tendency, despite being in a terrifying and dire situation. And also Anna Zinnerman was really great here too, though sadly she's not mentioned on the Obi strip. She was really good and quite moving in her performance, with her character adding an element of romantic tension with Masanti. As they have so often done, the CIA meddling in other countries' internal politics and using situations for their own ends is on clear display here. It's interesting that we have an Italian director portraying Americans and their internal espionage complications though, and we see the critique but also the undeniable adventure, so to speak, of it. I'll also say that the soundtrack was used so brilliantly here, at key moments upping the ante and keeping the tension high. Overall, this is another top tier release from Radiance for me, thoroughly engaging and enjoyable, where you're never sure what's going to happen next. Over the last few months I've ended up watching 3 films about lone gunmen: Targets from Peter Bogdanovich, Man on a Roof by Bo Vinderberg, and this one, Goodbye and Amen by Damiano Damiani. I think these also make brilliant companion pieces, as they take that core concept and yet we end up with such wildly different films, but all incredibly interesting. Next up, and we have Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. From 1958 and directed by Richard Brooks, it stars Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, Burl Ives, Judith Anderson, Jack Carson and Madeline Sherwood. This was actually one of the oldest films still sat unwatched in my collection, having bought it back in December 2021 to my shame, but I've just been putting it off and putting it off. To be honest, the premise reminded me of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and though that's a very impressive film in many ways, I found it pretty tough going. It's horribly cruel and brutal, as two intelligent people berate and verbally attack each other and go back and forth with emotional highs and devastating lows. And I just haven't been in the mood to subject myself to another Marriage on the Rocks story with Elizabeth Taylor. But I'm delighted to say that this one really surprised me, as though it does have a marriage on the rocks in it, it was in no way like the other film, which I was quite relieved to discover. Indeed, this is more a story about a family and is based on a play by Tennessee Williams, though despite that I actually thought it worked really well as a film, and I didn't feel enclosed or claustrophobic as some plays turned into films often can. The cast is brilliant and the acting on display is just exceptional. It's a family with a successful grandfather, played by Burl Ives, who is sick, and we have the brother and his wife who want to take over his empire, who seem fairly aligned in that, and then we have the other son, played by Paul Newman, whose marriage is teetering, and we don't know why to begin with. It's just a very human drama, as Williams' plays often are. It's rough and can be cruel at times, but it's captivating to watch them talk about truth and powering through the lies and the intense emotions sometimes on display. To have it out, as it were, to get to the bottom of things and then be able to move on. In a way, I suppose it's almost cathartic. How many relationships have years of hurt and anger or grudges, and just things that have not been let go of, never been talked out? Well, here in this story, whether people want it or not, it gets talked and sometimes shouted and sometimes whispered out. Paul Newman is really great as the hard and surly character who feels wronged, often avoiding people's eyes and looking down, as he is trying to drown his sorrows, remorse and his grief in one drink after another. The young and very beautiful Elizabeth Taylor does such a wonderful job as the suffering wife, trying and fighting for their marriage, refusing to give up and battling, not just for them to stay together, but also for his future in a way, for both their futures, because he seems to have almost given up. There is also a great exploration of wider family dynamics, as the older son, played by Jack Carson, contributes to this in a brutally honest and raw way, delivering some of the most powerful dialogue in the whole film that really floors you. Overall, this was simply riveting stuff. It's a story about love and withholding love, set within a family dealing with hardship, friction, lies and greed and the weight of history. Another superb story by Tennessee Williams, and set to screen superbly as well. And then last but not least, we have Matt and Mara, a film from 2024 and directed by Kazik Radwanski and starring Derar Campbell and Matt Johnson. I was lucky enough to jump on a deal that Mubi were offering in January for 3 months for just £1, which is an insanely good deal, and I was able to catch this one on their great streaming service, which I can highly recommend if you've not used it before. This is a story about two people who are both writers. One is a published and somewhat well-known author, I think edgy would be the word to use for him, and the other became a creative writing professor. They went to university together and clearly had a very deep friendship, but it's unclear if they ever dated or had a romance, but clearly there was a strong connection between them. Well, Matt the author is staying in Mara's city for a time and decides to track her down out of the blue, and they reconnect. What I loved about this film was that it flows and breathes and takes its time to tell a quiet but emotionally rich story. A kind of will they won't they, but done so wonderfully. I think if I gave this an alternate title, it would be Life and Love Are Complicated, the movie. And that pretty much sums it up. As we enjoy their coming back together and see the joys in the conversation, but also the old arguments and the history come through too. The film does a great job of taking us on a journey of when possibility shows itself, how the mundaneness of life or your routine, which you were perfectly content with before, can start to feel stagnant as you glimpse new possibilities. If a new romantic partner raises their head, things can take on a new light. Perhaps all of a sudden a silly argument with your current partner, which would have meant nothing to you a few days before, can now mean more. It can leave you feeling disillusioned and questioning your choices. Both of our main actors deliver excellent performances. They were just brilliant together, and you immediately understand his type of person and also her type of person, and they get you invested right away. There is a great scene in a car when they are arguing a bit, and they just get to the meat and bones of who each other is. More her towards him, I think, but it was just so well written and performed, and was one of the most impactful scenes, I thought. Overall, for a film that is only 80 minutes long, it didn't feel rushed or underdone. On the contrary, you felt the space and contemplation, the turmoil of the emotions, the hints of possibilities. I thoroughly enjoyed this, and if you like this sort of story, which while there is a romantic aspect I would not exactly call sentimental, then I think this would be right up your street. Needless to say that I got far more than my £1 worth of value from this film alone. And lastly then, that brings us on to my honourable mentions. First up is Snack Shack, which I have been very eager to see as it's Adam Raymeyer's film, following Dinner in America, which I absolutely loved. It's not quite in the same ballpark for me sadly, but still very enjoyable and well worth your time for a fun summer movie. I'm really hoping that Arrow Video pick this one up to give it a physical release. Next is The Brutalist. A curious film for me, and one where I far preferred the first half to the second, but an impressive film undoubtedly. One I'm quite keen to see again to find out what a second viewing will do. And then we have The Shop Around the Corner, which is a film I picked up following Solitary Ronin's recommendation, and it was a wonderful film. Margaret Sullivan and James Stewart, what's not to love? And then we have The Night of the 12th. A French police procedural about that one terrible case that no one can solve and that gnaws at you over the years. And lastly, Country Girl, which is definitely an actor's film, featuring some top tier performances from all three leads, Grace Kelly, William Holden and Bing Crosby. And well, that's everything from me. I hope your February was also full of wonderful films, and as I'm pretty late with this video, I hope your March has been excellent as well. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.